on this first ever very special episode of That Was a Show.
I did 75 series, so you can't love them all. With every show that I was hired for, I really did try to create a sonic brand, a unique identifying signature for the show that even from another room with their head in the refrigerator, people would hear it and the Pavlovian response would be, ooh, let's watch that show. I recognize that.
Do you remember watching sitcoms in the 80s and 90s where they would occasionally have an episode that they would categorize as a very special episode? It usually meant that they were going to be talking about something serious or they were going to Disney World. We thought it would be fun to do our own very special episodes. So here's our first one, a conversation with Jonathan Wolff, one of the most prolific composers of theme songs and musical scores for sitcoms ever.
Jonathan is best known for his work on such shows as Will and Grace, Married with Children, Who's the Boss, and, oh yes, Seinfeld. He created that innovative and iconic score. Those are his mouth pops and slap bass riffs. But Jonathan isn't joining us to talk about those legendary shows. As I note in the cold open of every episode, this is the podcast where we talk about the failed or forgotten sitcoms from the 80s and 90s.
We talked to him about all sorts of obscure and fascinating gems from his long career, spanning 3 decades and over 75 series. And also, Mr. Wolff does share some amazing nuggets about Seinfeld too. Now, cue our theme song. That was a show?
The podcast about failed or forgotten sitcoms from the 80s and 90s, starring
Brynn Byrne,
Aaron Yeger,
and Andrew Helmer as Barry.
A Radio Gizmo production.
Jonathan Wolff. Welcome to That Was a Show. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here.
And I'll just do a proper introduction of the three of us. So there's myself, Aaron Yeger, and I'm here with host Brynn Byrne, who, of course, connected you with us.
Hi, Jonathan. Mm-hmm. Nice to speak with you.
Nice to speak with you, Brynn.
And our other co-host, Andrew Helmer, who we call Barry.
Hi, Jonathan. How you doing today?
Hey, Barry. I'm doing good. I'm excited to talk to you about That Was a Show.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, thanks so much. We're really excited to have you on too. We've been doing this a few months, and we're starting with the guests, so we're excited to have you here.
Thank you. You called the right guy if you're looking for shows that failed and were forgotten.
That's excellent.
Yeah, I guess to jump right in there, the topic that sparked our initial contact was a post that I did on our Instagram account for an episode we did on the show Townies. Now, I chose Townies. What we do as hosts is take turns picking the shows that we would like to cover. And Townies was one of my very emphatic picks because I remember watching it when it was on the air. And at the time, I was quite young. I was like a preteen when it was on. And I personally had like a lot of fascination with it because it was like, oh, it's like young adults like out living their lives. And I just had a lot of nostalgia for this really short-lived show. So yeah, I guess I'm really curious to know, since you felt compelled to comment on our post, what was your experience like working on that show?
I loved working with Matthew Carlson, who is the exec and the head writer on that show. He's such a sweet guy and a good writer. And I've done a number of series with Matthew, and it was good. You know, Marcy Carsey was great to work with. I think Tom Werner was in on that also. Linwood Boomer. That may have been my first experience with Linwood. So it was really great to meet some of these folks. And the cast was certainly stacked.
Oh, phenomenal cast.
Molly Ringwald, and Jenna Elfman, Lauren Graham, Ron Livingston. It's a good cast. So, hey, it was a fun job for me. I got to write kind of an alternative rock.
Right on.
Yeah, the theme that to me was indicative of the attitude of these folks in Townies. Oh, by the way, one of the cast of Townies was Lee Garlington.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was in the pilot episode of Seinfeld.
Yeah. She was kind
Oh.
of like the proto Elaine almost. Yeah.
She was. What's funny is I was not on the pilot for Seinfeld. I came
Oh.
later and retrofit my music into it after the fact. But so, yeah, I did not get to work with Lee on that.
Oh.
That's funny. Yeah, so you kind of answered my question. My next question was going to be just about the music of Townies. I definitely right away identified the fact that it was trying to sort of mimic the kind of singer-songwriter alt folk rock that was popular at the time, and it seemed like the theme song, like were you involved in the theme song, or was that
I created the theme song.
okay? Yeah, because I was like, it definitely seems like a Natalie Merchant song, or a
Okay. Yeah.
like that kind of basically someone who would have performed at Lilith Fair.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that was kind of consistent with the musical sensibility of the show. I think
Yeah.
there was actually a Natalie Merchant song licensed at some point in the show.
In the wedding scene, I think in that pilot, there is an
Yeesh.
actual. It sounded like Natalie Merchant anyway.
Yeah, I think that's now my memory is not what it used to be. Also, my memory is not what it used to be. I retired in 2005. Yeah, I'm an old guy, and this was a long time ago. So you may have to refresh my memories on things, or forgive me if I make stuff up.
Sure. Well, we're
But
okay
yeah,
with it.
I kind of did like the music for it, that I got to use open, weird tune guitars, and had my friends sing it. And again, mostly my memory of it was that I reported to Matthew Carlson, who was awesome.
Okay, great.
One of the things that popped up for me is we haven't covered it on the show yet, but it was one of my personal favorite forgotten sitcoms. You did the music for the 1999 Hollywood centric Action with Jay Moore.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I did 75 series.
Yeah.
So you can't love them all.
Yeah.
And a lot of them died with cause. That particular one, Action, I really wish it had happened 20 years later, because
Oh yeah.
now it would totally rock on TV.
Oh
But
yeah.
at the time, they just didn't know what I think that was Fox, and they had no idea what to do with that show. And they had no idea what to do with Chris Thompson, the writer. who
Yeah.
I love working for Chris. I did a bunch of shows with. I think we were doing 2 shows at the same time.
Wow.
Chris had a kind of a dopey sitcom on CBS at the same time called Ladies Man.
Oh, we know Ladies Man.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
With Alfred Molina.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
you're right though. Action, Entourage was doing it years later. What Action was pretty much trying to do.
It was way ahead of its time, as Chris pretty much was his whole career.
Mm-hmm.
And it had, what a cast: Jay Moore and Buddy Hackett. Actual Buddy Hackett was on this.
Oh yeah.
One of my favorite, and of course, Ileana Douglas was just amazing.
Oh, she's the best.
Yeah, Jared Paul was in it. For Seinfeld fans, he's Darren.
Oh, he's Darren. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, the intern, Kramer's intern. My favorite Seinfeld connection to Action is Lee Ehrenberg.
Oh, right.
Remember his character?
He was the producer, right?
Yeah, well, he was the boss. The studio had.
Yeah.
I forget, something G, Bobby G or something.
Something like that,
And man, Lee was so good in that show. He was just so funny. And of course, on Seinfeld, he's phony Mike.
Right. Yes. Oh my
Oh,
God.
amazing.
I watched the
love
pilot not
Phony
too long
Mike.
ago, and I was just like,
Yeah.
where am I remembering this guy from?
Remember, he got caught calling in Jerry. He says, use it in a sentence. That Michael Jordan is so phony. And he turns instantly on Michael and goes, why'd you tell him? I'm kind of a fanboy over Lee's work, and especially when you go see the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And
Right? He's one of the
those two
sidekicks.
pirates that I got together. Man, he is just so good.
He's-
So
he's-
thanks
He
for
has
mentioning.
such a good energy.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Action was a big
Here's
one.
the story. Here's the story. Because we were already doing Ladies Man,
Mhm.
which was a perfectly serviceable stock sitcom on CBS. And my memory is that Chris called me and he says, look, I'm writing every episode of Ladies Man, so I'm kind of busy, but we got this new show. And I'm writing every word of this new show. It's called Action. And it's going to be wall-to-wall music, Wolf. Every single scene going to have music in it. And I want it to be hard-hitting and unique and fun. And I have in my head already exactly what music I want for each of these scenes. Your job, Wolf, is to make sure you don't give it to me.
Oh, wow.
I like that.
That's great.
I love that. I just Captain. I knew what that meant. He liked to be surprised. He did not want music that would normally fit
Yeah, for
into
sure.
those scenes. So it gave me complete carte blanche to do whatever I wanted. And I pulled in, since there was so much music, I pulled in one of my guys, Paul Buckley, to partner with me on this. And we just went whack on these episodes. We just split it down the middle and go, here, you take the first half, I'll take the second half. So if you go back and watch it, pay attention to the music. But yes, I do recommend to your listeners, look up the series Action if you can find it somewhere.
Mhm.
And I think you will enjoy it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, what are you? Tell me what else? What else are you interested in?
Well, I mean, even on Action, I mean, I think he answered most, but I mean, it was definitely a different project on the air because it was kind of like the first of like a new batch of like single camera shows, right? So like, because it wasn't like the standard 3-camera like setup, quick intro outro music on a lot of scenes, like you said, there was a lot of music in it. So did you find you had to take a different approach to that kind of thing based off of like how different it was from say Ladies Man or?
Well, yeah, because there was just more music.
Way
and it was
more, yeah.
a lot of underscore, which a lot of the 3-cam sitcoms don't use a lot of underscore, but this was, and it was fun. And again, it was about that relationship with Chris Thompson.
Mhm.
I'd worked with him, I don't know how many shows, Carolina in the City, Dave's World. He was around. He was always in the writer's room hanging around, and he was usually the most angular of the writers. He would spice it up by
Yeah.
throwing in weird stuff into the script. So I was really happy when he started getting his own shows. In fact, there was a pilot that we did that's on nobody's list because it never went anywhere because people would just watch it. And once they caught their breath from laughing hysterically, they would all say the same thing. Well, what are we supposed to do with this? We can't air this on our network. It was a pilot called Trash.
Oh, wow. That's a loaded
as it
title.
Yeah, it was about people who live in a trailer park. So they're trailer trash.
Oh, wow.
boy.
Most of the, I've done a lot of sitcoms. I read a lot of scripts. I've seen a lot of jokes, and there are only a handful of jokes that happen over and over again, and they're dressed up differently. Trash had gags and jokes that I have never seen before or since.
Wow.
He's such a weird guy. And I love that pilot. It's kind of one, I don't care about pilots. You do thousands of pilots.
Mhm.
That's not hyperbole. Because pilots, for every slot that a network has for a new show, they'll order 10 pilots. So most of them will never make the air. So pilots are like building sandcastles. You know they're going to get washed away. But that particular pilot, I wish I had a copy of it somewhere just because it's funny, just
Well,
to show my kids and say, this is unique.
You've made us want to watch it too,
Yeah,
I think.
no, it's like
we want to
find
see
it.
this.
It's probably in some archive somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you find it, let me know.
Were you often brought in at the pilot stage on a lot of things? Yeah,
Especially people with whom I had a working relationship
for sure.
with. They had a list of people that they knew they wanted. So I'd get the call early on and do the pilots. Sometimes it was an opportunity for me to make new relationships with people. And some of these pilots were terrible. And that's okay because the next one would be better.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
that's how I built a client list, was by doing some of those terrible pilots.
For sure. So Thompson was behind Trash. Who was in Trash? Do you remember? Or?
I don't. I'm sorry. I can picture his face. I can picture it. It was, and it wasn't even about the stars. It was all on the page.
I'm gonna do a deep dive.
Yeah, we're gonna do a dig on this.
Find it. Let me know.
Yeah, for sure.
We do. We'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it never aired. It was pretty darn funny.
I'm going to jump in here with a question that geeks out on the music a little bit.
Please.
Digging into some of your impressive library of work, it seems like you innovated a lot with sampling real-world sounds sometimes that you would capture and then turn into instrumentation. And I discovered this show Double Rush. I'd love to hear about how you created this theme with the bicycle courier sounds and borrowing from their world. And would you consider that sort of technique to be one of your, I don't know, I'll say signature tools?
Well, I approached every project differently. I don't think I had a signature device. So I'll answer that question first. But Double Rush, I'm glad you brought that one up. That's another one that I thought could have maybe had more life. It was Diane English, who is Diane English. She's amazing. And it was really an honor to become her composer. That was my first series for Diane, and then she used me on a bunch of them after that. This series had, again, a stacked cast. I think Robert Pastorelli, David Arquette, Adam Goldberg. Daryl Hughley was in it.
Yeah.
Sam Lloyd was in it. This is serious business, this cast. And later, of course, I did DL's series called The Hugleys.
Yeah.
But it's funny that I met him on Double Rush. It was a show about daredevil bicycle couriers in New York City. You know how the rhythmic sounds of a bike as you're riding it can be hypnotic and also musical? Well, as you mentioned, I created a groove using sampled sounds of my bicycle. Gears shifting, chains and derailleur clunks, brake squeaks, tire skids, against a backdrop of close proximities, fast-moving city sounds, horn honks, people shouting, and the biker's internal POV of breathing hard and the heartbeats. And yes, sampling was in its infancy in that era, and I really was jonesing to use it. I was kind of a technophile and I really wanted to use it a lot. So when Diane approached me about this series, I pitched it to her, and the idea that I would build a groove around a bicycle. And there's no way to show her what that means because I had not built the instrument yet. But she is a courageous producer. She hires people that she trusts and lets them do their thing. And she did that with me. She said, okay, go. And I never talked to her again until it was done. And I called her up and said, hey, Diane, want to give this a listen? She came by, she sat down, I played it for her, and she took a moment to absorb it because it was kind of wild and wacky. Beside the bike, I had a maniacal frazzle energy guitar going. And she said, play it again. So I played it again, and she stood up and said, thank you, we're done. And then she gave it to a young, unknown guerrilla filmmaker named Spike Jones.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Spike used my music to build the opening titles for it. So that was kind of fun that I was in on the ground floor of Spike Jones's career.
That's awesome. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it was really good. It's a shame that it only lasted one season. And here's a tribute to Diane English. At the end of it, she wrote me a little handwritten note. And it said, it was an apology. He said, I'm sorry that the show never lived up to the promise of the main title.
Aww.
which it was a very kind thing to say.
It's a classy note.
But anyway, that was Double Rush. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. And after I discovered the show and your work on it, I did watch the first episode. In addition to the sound and the music that you created for the opening titles being really interesting, visually, it was very dynamic. So to know how that came together is really interesting to learn, because it did feel like the interplay between the sound and the visuals worked so well. And the cast, as you say, it was really solid. And it did feel like a show that, based on the pilot, seemed to have a lot of potential. And I was then surprised that this didn't last longer than it did, because based on what I've seen, I thought, yeah, of course this is going to be a thing.
Yeah. Michael Lembeck, if I recall, directed it. It was all good. It was the A team of folks, but this is the big leagues.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you swing hard at the fastballs, you miss. That's just how it goes.
Yeah.
Everybody strikes out occasionally.
That's true.
And we did on this one. It was, I think this was my first time working with Stephen Nathan, also a really good writer. And Michael Pachter King was in on this one. He was in on the pilot, I think.
That's interesting.
Because then he and I did a couple other things besides that. But yeah, it was a really hot bunch of people. It just doesn't always work. And we can try and second guess after the fact why. But there's a lot to it. If you guys wanted to do a show on that. Oh, I noticed, by the way, I hate to change the subject. I noticed that you recently did a podcast on Joni Loves Chachi.
Yes, absolutely.
That was our last episode that we released.
So before I had earned my career as a full-time composer, the studios used me like a Swiss Army multi-purpose utility tool for musical chores. I did odd jobs. I was a handyman for music stuff. And the last episode of Happy Days, I think it was the last episode, was the wedding between Joni and Chachi, and I did the music for the wedding.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's a really fun little nugget there.
Yeah.
It was. I think it was a duo, a string duo, because the set was already crowded, and they said, "Well, these are not people of means. How about if we, instead of a string quartet, we just make it a string duo? Can you do that?" Yeah, watch this.
Why not?
So that's a little bit of trivia.
Yeah, that would have been so that would have been real early in your career. You would have been a young buck.
I was a young buck doing stuff. Well, I moved to LA when I was 17 and started working instantly. That was in 1976. So yeah, I was instantly doing that kind of stuff, doing orchestrations for other composers, conducting sessions for other composers, and doing the kind of the crappy jobs, writing songs for dance numbers, and and I was happy to do it. And I did it for 10 years.
Wow.
And at a certain point, I think I once heard a wonderful storyteller say, "Take action when you are ready."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was you, Brynn.
Did you really just watch a YouTube video of me?
I did.
Oh my goodness. I'm so flattered.
And you were adorable.
That's really touching.
And he told a good story. But anyway, after 10 years of doing chores, I finally was ready to do what I knew I wanted, because I'd had a taste of being the composer for series. I'd done a couple of series. I'd done Square Pegs and a couple others. And I just decided this is what I want to do. And all these folks in the music departments and producers and music supervisors and other composers who had been so kind to me for those 10 years and generous and had faith in my abilities and confidence in my professionalism. I was so grateful to them. I sent them each a letter, is in an envelope on paper because there was no email yet. And I thanked them for the privilege, the honor of doing their music chores. Now stop that. I'm no longer available for those assignments. I am a composer. I just started this company. Here's the address. Come, let's do business.
Wow.
And then I held my breath until all those envelopes reached their destination. And all over Hollywood, people shrugged and said, "Gee, that's too bad. He's a good utility guy." Well, Okay. And then they started hiring me
Mhm.
as a composer. And that is how my real composing career began. And then I stopped doing wedding music for other series.
On that note, one of your first composer credits is for a very short-lived show from 1987. Now, you warned me that your memory isn't that great, so maybe this will be a challenge for you. But what do
Okay.
you remember about the show The Charmings?
Ooh, it was terrible. I do. It deserved to die. Although later in my career, I worked on the show Reba, which was a wonderful show. And Christopher Rich is one of the leads in Reba. So I got a chance one day to just say, I won't tell if you don't tell, but we were both on The Charmings.
Yeah, that was definitely the credit of yours that really stood out. I went on a whole rabbit hole looking that one up.
Yeah, Prue and Rob. I really, except for him being on it, I have almost no memories of that show. I think Roxy Evans may have been the line producer on it. Other than that, I got nothing.
I feel like
Fair enough.
I feel like the rest of the viewing public probably about the same there.
Yeah.
Or you know what? I think I met Al Lowenstein on that, and then later worked with him on better projects. But
everything's a stepping stone, right?
Yeah, and Danny Callis may have been in the room. There was kind of an incestuous bunch of writers in those days, the early days of Columbia Pictures Television, which grew out of Embassy TV. That may have been my introduction into that camp. And then later I did, 20, 25 series for that camp, including Who's the Boss and Married with Children and a few others.
Mm-hmm.
But thanks for asking about The Charmings, and I apologize. I don't have much memory of it. I think they retooled in season 2 and did not rehire me for that. That's the only job that now I'm remembering. I think that was the one job in my entire career that I got fired from or replaced on.
Wow.
They were just trying to, maybe they were trying to save you the
from having to answer these questions. It's fun. I was really fascinated by the concept of this podcast. I was the composer on 75 primetime network television series, and that sounds like a lot of success, but most of those shows were not winners.
Yeah.
You can chart the course of my TV music career by that long trail of mushroom clouds and blast craters behind me. At each one of those disaster sites, I had to kiss a frog. Most of those frogs just exploded.
Well, I mean, this is something we're seeing over and over again, that very talented and very successful people have made a lot of stinkers. Like, it just,
man.
It's just the way it goes. Like, not everything can be Seinfeld. Not everything can be Friends. Like, it's something we're seeing over and over again. And we even have our segment that we do, which is the spinoff, which we talk about what people went on to do after this failed or forgotten
you can put
sitcom.
me on that. It's true that a lot of people who I met and work with later in my career, I would have that, like the conversation I had with Chris Rich. I had that same conversation with a bunch of people that, hey, remember that show? Yeah, I was there too.
Right on.
So I've got plenty of those stories. It was amazing that they kept hiring me. For example, on ABC, wow, it's a good thing that I had a couple of strong earners, like Who's the Boss and the Hughleys, because I had so many. My death list of failed shows on ABC's it's the Ted Harbert and Steve McPherson should have had me whacked just to stop me from creating more ABC themes. It's a good thing Tony Danza liked me though, so they couldn't.
Yeah, I was curious about that. I noticed that you had been involved in, like, obviously you were composer for Who's the Boss, but then you did Hudson Street and then the Tony Danza show. So obviously
Yeah,
there was a relationship.
Anything Tony touched after Who's the Boss, he made certain that I was the composer for it. And I so appreciate that kind of loyalty.
Yeah.
And
I learned a lot just from watching Tony, his drive, his enthusiasm, his always striving for perfection and demanding that of people, his subordinates. And so, I liked working for Tony. And thanks for noticing those couple of shows. Those were a couple of themes that I was kind of proud of, those two that you mentioned. They were failed shows, but still.
Hudson Street had a really interesting concept. And anything with Tony Danza, at the very least, you're getting Tony Danza in there. So there's going to be some gold.
Charisma. Just his charisma is just, and it was a good team. Lori Loughlin, who's in the news this week. She was on that show. If I recall, Jerry Adler was on that show. I don't remember who else. A couple of kids, but no. Hudson Street was not kids. Hudson Street was the police. Tom Gallup was one of the people in it. So it was well cast. Working with Randy Mayim Singer, always a pleasure. She's a strong writer. She was a strong executive producer. She was clearly the one who ran that show. So for me, it was a good experience.
Nice.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm very curious about, when a lot of people think about sitcom music, the first thing that comes to mind is probably that opening theme. But when it comes to something that's created for a specific episode or a specific scene, do you have a favorite particular episode or a favorite plot from a music perspective of something that you scored that you can recall, particularly if the sound or music weaved its way into the plot of the show?
Boy, it's a long list. Occasionally, I'd be working and my music editor would come up behind me and go, "Wow, real music." Because it wasn't always the case. You're not creating art here. My job was to serve the production, and sometimes that meant dopey music. On some shows, it was clearly instructed to be dopey music, like Married with Children.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of my job, was to create, unfinished music, we'll say. So, I can't really think of. Okay, let's go for it. We weren't supposed to talk about Seinfeld, but Seinfeld's a good example of places where I got to stretch my legs a lot. For example, it became a running gag, chase scenes in Seinfeld.
I love the chase scenes in Seinfeld.
Yeah, it was kind of a trope.
The one where a
comedy trope.
The cable guys after
Kramer.
Oh, yeah. I loved that. And that may have been the first one. And it was long and involved. I scored it as if it was a serious cinematic action chase, like secret funny sauce. And it worked. I loved that scene. And after that, I think it was just something LD would go back to. He says, "Let's put in a chase here, Wolff." Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's phenomenal.
So, yeah, and there was someone were sillier, like Jerry chasing Newman, or the old folks chasing.
Oh, on the Rascals.
Jason.
Yeah.
Oh, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, so I was kind of proud of that I got to do that. And there was a lot of movies, a lot of fake productions on Seinfeld.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Sack Lunch is my favorite.
Rochelle.
Exactly. Hey,
Death Blow.
We're going to miss the Death Blow.
These were all shows that, not all of them, but most of them were shows that were heard but not seen.
Yeah, you're right. Your music created essentially the whole imagery behind like these movies that don't exist at all, but like in my brain they are, like Rochelle or Cry Again.
Yes, my cheesy Euro trash accordion, sappy music for the trailer for Rochelle.
Yeah.
Of course, I also this is the pinnacle of my career. Larry called me and said, "Hey, we're gonna do a musical, Rochelle the musical. And I need you to write the opening song for it." And I said, okay, I'm on it. How long should the song be? And he goes, it doesn't matter because she's not going to make it through the first line. She'll be too weepy. And so I got to write that Rochelle, the musical song. Yeah, it was a wacky part of my job, but some of them were fun. Channel.
Yeah.
The Scarsdale's Surprise. Here we are. It's a fake Tony Award show with a fake musical and a fake theme for the musical, and it played over and over again. But some of them were fun, like the show in a show, the Jerry Show.
Yeah.
That was kind of fun. Again, I got to write a fake theme. Larry Charles was the one who gave me instruction on that. He just said it should be a typical silly, stupid sitcom theme. Again, I go, oh, baby, you called the right guy. And that's what I did. But it was my favorite, since you're asking about favorites, of those Seinfeld fictitious productions was one that we did see, Flaming Globes of Sigmund.
Oh, wow. That's a great reference.
Larry in a spacesuit.
Oh, that's
bad nighttime sci-fi.
Yeah.
So it was fun. All right, we got off track there. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
No, that's so good. And
Looked into it.
I was using my maximum self-control to avoid talking about Seinfeld. So I really appreciate you mentioning
you
those
asked about underscore, and
But,
Seinfeld is where I did a lot of fun. Oh, and wait a minute. Oh, what about the pastiche scenes that we, where we did kind of homage to a movie. And of course, that's a lot of that is music, like in the end of The Cadillac, where Morty and his family leave the impeached and disgraced president's home with quiet, regal dignity. So I treated it like the movie Nixon.
Yeah.
And there were a whole bunch of those pastiche movies that I got to score. So it was kind of fun. There was the Peterman scene in The Jungles of Burma, where Elaine finds him. It was kind of like from Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
So I used
you mean Myanmar?
Myanmar, yes. I used water phone and gamelan bells to score it. I know that's gibberish.
So
no, that's great.
See what I did there?
So I have to say, because I was reflecting on this before our conversation, since it came up, my favorite use of music within a scene in Seinfeld is when Elaine is dating the saxophone player, and he loses his embouche when he finally does quote unquote everything.
I'll bet you've been waiting to use the word embouche.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's because I dropped it earlier, isn't it?
Yeah, when I created those loose mouth saxophone squawks, I remember thinking, well, that's another skill they don't teach you in music school.
How to ruin a saxophone.
Yeah.
But it was, what was his name? John Germain was the character. And not too long ago, Warner Brothers asked me if I'd put together a playlist for a Seinfeld soundtrack album.
Oh, interesting.
And I actually did. The day we recorded the John Germain stuff, I actually did full versions of real hard-hitting, strong bop jazz. So I've got those that I might include on the record that no one's ever really heard the whole versions of them.
Wow.
But yeah, that was kind of a fun episode to do. It was that was called The Rye, I think.
Yeah, that was in The Rye.
Yes, it was a lot of very, very highbrow classic comedy, like Rusty the Farting Horse.
That's funny.
Yeah, so thanks for noticing that. I liked when they let me throw in with the comedy on any of the shows.
Yeah.
All right, shall we get back to the topic at hand, which is my long death list of obscure failed show titles?
Absolutely.
One thing I wanted to ask about, this is not about a specific show, but it's something that we love to do on the podcast. And you reminded me because right before you went into the Seinfeld rabbit hole, you mentioned tropes. And something that we love to do here is kind of call out the tropes that exist in these 80s and 90s sitcoms. And I guess what we were dying to know is, like, from your perspective, what is a music trope from 80s and 90s sitcoms?
Well, there was a lot of silly theme music during those years. A lot of, melodic, sassy saxophones and silly lyrics. Guilty. I created a lot of that music. So there was kind of a sound, that Friday night Miller Boyette sound, which I was not part of, but
that was like Jesse Frederick.
Correct. But, it kind of defined an era of that kind of family-friendly sitcom music. And sometimes I had to default to that. I would usually try to, with every show that I was hired for, I really did try to create a sonic brand, a unique identifying signature for the show that even from another room with their head in the refrigerator, people would hear it, and a Pavlovian response would be, "Ooh, let's watch that show. I recognize that." And it's hard to do that when you're matching in with other derivative music. I found that part of my job became, in the initial meeting with the execs, avoiding that moment where the exec or the producer or somebody says, "Oh, the music should sound like," it doesn't matter how that sentence ends. It's already derivative music because it sounds like whatever they're thinking of. So part of my job was to try and steer people away from that sentence, to let me do what I do and see if you like it.
Right on.
You'll get my best work if you do.
And that's creativity right there.
I was in one of those meetings once with a bunch of young people who just come off of Letterman or wherever they'd come from, and they're all anxious to be producers. And Tom Sharonis was in the room. He was the grandmaster, the guru, the Yoda of the room. And he was just sitting there playing with his pipe. And all these guys were saying, "Oh, the guitar from this song, the vibe from this band," and I'm just trying my best to catch it all. And at some point, Tom saw I was in trouble, and he clears his throat and he goes, "Excuse me, you don't hire a dog and then tell it how to bark." And he went back to his pipe. And that was all he said. And, they all went, "Oh, okay, I get it. Well, what do you think, Wolff?" I think I've got enough information about your music sensibilities so that whatever I do will be respectful of that. I'll see you tomorrow. And so Tom saved me on that and gave me a story to tell about it. By the way, I loved working with Sharonis. He's just so good and so smart.
Oh yeah, he's one of the greats.
Yeah. So, and he was on a bunch of these failed shows too, but I'm glad I got to at least enjoy some success with him also. All right. What other shows you like? What else were you thinking about from my pool of failures?
This one's more, I mean, it's both failed. I don't know if it's forgotten, but you were brought on to Saved by the Bell, the college years. And that must have been kind of interesting because, like, you were kind of coming aboard a project that had an established type of music from the original series, but you kind of had to make it your own, I would imagine. So how did you find that?
Well, you're right. It had been a kind of well established, but my conversation with them was that sometimes a TV theme serves to identify the location or a historic period of the show. And my theme for your show will help us transition the lives of these characters from high school to college. It's going to be more grown-up music. So that's how I approached it. I kind of had the voice of AC Slater in my head as a college student.
Yeah.
And I wrote that theme hoping that we'd at least get 4 years out of it. We did not.
Yeah.
Obviously. But it was kind of a nice honor to be included in that show. It's a forever show.
Yeah, it's very it holds a lot of nostalgia for us, the Saved by the Bell universe, because we're, the three of us are in our 30s, so that was like our childhood was Saved by the Bell.
Yeah, and there was, besides the kids, Holland Taylor was on that. and I'd worked with her on
Boston
The
Common?
Naked. Was she on Boston Common?
She was.
I don't think so.
She was.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I liked Boston Common.
Yeah,
Has another
me
show
too.
that we want to. But
Yeah.
I was thinking The Naked Truth and
Right.
Dag and the Fighting Fitzgeralds. But if she was on, yeah, okay, Boston Common was a fun show. Now we're talking about NBC. Now in NBC, my win-loss ratio was at least good enough that I didn't have to avoid eye contact with Warren Littlefield in the men's room. At least I had enough winners, among my NBC themes: Seinfeld, Will and Grace, The Naked Truth, Caroline in the City. So yeah, NBC, I wasn't such a pariah. But yeah, Boston Common. All right, let's talk about Boston Common. Boston Common was a fun little serviceable show. Anthony Clark, I really enjoyed working. That was my first show for Dave and Max.
Oh, wow.
For Dave Cohan and Max Muchnick. And of course, I did a bunch of them after that. James Widows and I had established a really good composer-director relationship by that point. So, and there were some really musical episodes of Boston Common. That was actually a good show. It was a really well-written show, had a pretty good cast. It just didn't go. And forgive me, because I don't remember Taylor being in it.
So Traylor Howard was the love interest.
Oh, Traylor Howard. That's a different person.
Who are we talking about? I got confused. I rarely get confused. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
We were talking about Saved by the Bell, and that was Holland Taylor.
Holland Taylor. Oh my God.
Who's
a completely different person. Different person. My apologies.
Yeah, Traylor Howard.
My apologies.
That's quite Traylor. It was just too adorable and too cute.
Yeah.
In Boston Common. She was just, and her character name, I think, was Joy, of course.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
But it was a fun show, so I enjoyed doing it. And I was kind of fond of that theme, although I try not to get too attached to my children. That theme, I really kind of liked it. So I was sad to see that one die. I don't know, what do we do? 2 seasons, 3 seasons of that?
I think it did 2.
Yeah, but the good news is we were all together. The show got canceled kind of as a surprise, if I recall. It was mid-season. And we were all together. It was a good crew, good writers. And Max and Dave had this script in their pocket. It wasn't called Will and Grace. It was called something else. But it was Will and Grace. Wow. And we still had the stage. It was mid-season, so we could still use the stage. It was the same network, and we just jumped right into doing Will and Grace.
That's amazing.
So I guess that's the phoenix that rose from Boston Common.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was the frog that had to be kissed.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So for shows that do end up running for a while, I think one of the things that audiences love about sitcoms is falling in love with the characters through their recurring personality traits and just being such a character-driven genre. What can you tell us about building perhaps musical motifs around characters over time where audiences might become attached to a particular aspect of the music of a show almost as if it's a character?
That notion of having motifs associated with storylines or with characters, I did more of that before I became a sitcom composer. When I was doing 1-hour shows and dramas, there was more call for that. For example, I was in rotations for a bunch of those nighttime soaps. I was never the credit composer, but I did a whole bunch of those episodes for Dallas and Knots Landing, Falcon Crest, Dynasty, Colby's. Oh, wow. And there was a lot of motif recurring themes in those scores. On sitcoms, I didn't really do much of that. It's a good question, but I didn't really. No, I was more interested in creating a sonic brand for the show itself, so that even if someone turned to it mid-show, they would recognize it.
If you were to suggest to us your top pick for a failed or forgotten sitcom from the 80s or 90s that you scored, that you think we should cover in a future episode of our podcast, what show would that be?
Well, you've hit on a couple of them. I thought you mentioned Action. That was pretty darn good show. And that was one that had a lot of music in it. We talked about Boston Common. I was sad to see that die. Square Pegs was kind of a fun show that died too soon. Not because it wasn't popular. It was a hit show on CBS, but because, our exec couldn't get along with anybody. So that would be a good show. The O'Keeffes was a fun show that no one ever saw. Dave's World was a fun show that not a whole lot of people saw.
I remember Dave's World.
I remember Dave's World. I think that's great for the forgotten category, I think.
Forgotten, because we actually went. Here's what I think happened. CBS just forgot about us and they forgot to cancel us.
Amazing.
So we kept shrugging our shoulders and coming back and doing more of them. And that's, by the way, the show where I first met Patrick Warburton.
Oh, nice.
We also, we did a lot of years on Seinfeld. We also did a terrible show called, give me a second. Oh, Less Than Perfect.
Oh,
okay.
Right. Yes.
Oof, terrible, awful. But yeah, those shows, I think that's a good list to check out, to think about.
We definitely will.
Yeah, we absolutely will dig into all of that.
You're probably, even though I've worked on more than anyone you've ever met, you're probably more knowledgeable about those forgotten shows than I am, because I'm one of those people who forgot them.
Well, I mean, part of our whole shtick is that we're big nerds, and Barry and I specifically, we were raised by television, and the basis of our long friendship has been talking about all of these old, obscure sitcoms. And Aaron was the one who was finally like, okay, why don't we just do something with this? Because
I appreciate it, because every network, even failed networks like the WB network or UPN, they each have, figuratively, graveyards of shows that died young. And a lot of those markers read theme music by Jonathan Wolff. So I'm the right music guy for your podcast. So thank you for including me in our talk today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah,
this was great.
It's an absolute honor to speak with you. You created music that has basically scored our youth and life as television addicts. So it's an honor and a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, thank you. And by the way, I'm a big fan of Toronto.
Oh, amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you so much,
My
Jonathan.
wife and I love going there. We go there to hit up Kensington Market or St. Lawrence Market, and
Kensington's
Awesome.
the best.
yeah, and if we time it right, we can go to a Jays game and a Leafs game, and we're the ones that go to that hockey museum.
Oh, yeah.
There's you ever
the
been
Hall
there?
of Fame. Yeah, down on.
Yeah, exactly.
Down front, yeah.
Which seems like a silly thing. I thought, well, let's go in. We'll spend 20 minutes. Oh, look, there's a lucite case with hockey sticks. Oh, look, there's another lucite case with hockey sticks. But in truth, it's really fun. We'll spend a whole day there with all the interactive stuff, and it's really a great thing for hockey fans. And we love staying at the Royal York.
Oh, yeah.
It's a classic.
It's just a wonderful town. So thank you for reaching out from Toronto.
We thank you so much for talking with us today. Thanks, Jonathan. That was amazing.
Good luck, and let me know when it airs, and make sure you tag me on Instagram, because I could really use some love on Instagram. It's Seinfeld Music Guy. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Well, that was such a great experience getting to meet Mr. Wolff and talk all about his work on some really interesting, failed and forgotten sitcoms, and also some of our absolute favorites of all time. If you want to hear more about how he created the Seinfeld theme, I highly recommend listening to his interview on the podcast 20,000 Hertz. He talks about how he built the score around Jerry's voice as an instrument, with a specific tempo and everything. It's a fascinating story for anyone interested in either television or musical composition. We are so grateful that he came on our podcast as our first ever interview and shared so many fun stories. And I look forward to listening to that Seinfeld soundtrack compilation, especially the full-length jazz piece by John Germain, but actually by Jonathan Wolff. Thank you, Jonathan. We are definitely inspired to do more very special episodes in the future, so stay tuned. And cut to credits. That Was a Show is a production of Radio Gizmo. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and follow us on Instagram for info about upcoming episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends about it.
Next time on That Was a Show, what do you remember about the show The Charmings?
Ooh, it was terrible. It deserved to die.
Radio Gizmo.